Hello, good morning, and welcome to Glasgow Rangers Nation, or good afternoon, good evening. Depends, obviously, when you're watching it, what is up to you guys out there. Right, look, we have had to use a different camera today. I'm using my laptop camera because my web camera has decided, of all days, that this is the day it wants to stop working and pack up. Great, isn't it? Anyway, so apologies for the difference in quality in picture. Hope you still are able to enjoy the video. We're going to talk transfer strategy because, let's face it, this season is pretty much done and dusted. It is over, guys. Look, yes, there's a big game coming up at the weekend. Yes, it's Celtic. Yes, it's the Old Firm. Yes, it's the Old Firm. Celtic fans, stop being so bloody childish and say, no, it's not. The Old Firm died in 2012. It's the Glasgow Derby. No, it isn't. Look at UEFA, what they said about the two clubs. Look at what the SFA said about the club and grow the fuck up. Stop being childish. You are being pathetic, and you look pathetic, and you sound pathetic, as per usual. Typical Tims. Anyway, we'll talk transfer strategy. Look, now this comes off the back of an article I was reading in one of the local papers, one of the papers down here, around Leeds United. Now, obviously, we don't know what the future is going to hold for Rangers in terms of transfer strategy, in terms of the way forward, in terms of the way that the 49ers will invest in the club and how they foresee transfer strategy going at the club. You can only perhaps go off what they've done previously. You can go off how they run their NFL franchise, how they run Leeds United, and look at, that is the way forward. That is what they will do once they come in to the club. And I think, you can pick up a fairly good idea how they're going to operate from that. If you look at the way they operate over in America with their NFL franchise, they operate very much on the grounds that, once players start to get older, they look to get rid of them, they look to move them on, they look to either trade them or cut them to, obviously increase obviously their cap space. One of the things you need to know obviously about the NFL is it has a salary cap. You can only spend a certain amount on players' salaries, bit like FFP, PSR, but a hell of a lot stricter. And also, the fact that you can't pay transfer fees for players out there. It is a trade. So you trade draft picks, you trade players, you trade, that's how you work out there. It is not we'll give you £20 million for your best wide receiver or £30 million for your best quarterback. It doesn't work like that out there. That's not how they work. I think they would see that whole process as a bit kind of mind-boggling. But, looking at Leeds United, now obviously Leeds United have now been promoted to the Premier League, which obviously kind of puts to a nail in the coffin of one of Professor Declan O'Reilly's of the Parkhead University Celtic Studies Department's theories that the takeover won't go ahead because Leeds can't own two clubs whilst in the Championship. So they're not in the Championship next season. So Professor O'Reilly, it's okay, don't you worry about it. So look, that is the way it looks forward. Now, there's a lot of talk that even though Daniel Farke, who is the Leeds United manager, has obviously done very well this season, got Leeds United promoted, was unlucky last season not to get Leeds United promoted as well, got a massive number of points, but still managed to finish third and lose out in the playoffs to, I think it was Southampton in the end. There's still a kind of a doubt about his future at the club, and that's around transfer strategy. And that's why, apparently, there's two reasons why. One is because he's failed in the Premier League in the past with Norwich City, been relegated straight away. And I think the 49ers enterprises don't want a season where they go up, come straight back down again. They want to, once they go up, they want to stay. And I think, that's one idea. And the other is obviously that according to reports in the Leeds area and obviously around that area, there is a kind of a falling out between the manager and the owners over the transfer strategy going forward. Now, according to the papers and the reports down here, and look, I know you've got to take all reports with a slight pinch of salt, and you might say, what's this got to do with Rangers? Well, I think the reason I'm talking about this on a Rangers video is because the way the Niners enterprises are operating the transfer strategy at Leeds, I think gives us a huge hint as to how they will operate the transfer strategy at Rangers once they take over, and the type of manager they will be looking for once they take over the club. So the strategy very much apparently that Farke wants to follow is to bring in tried, tested, battle-hardened Premier League experienced players. A bit in line, I think, with what the fans want to do up here, that they want to bring in tried, tested SPL players, Scottish players, a core of Scottish players to kind of, bring that Rangers element to the club. That's, kind of trying to link it as kind of as loosely as we can between the two strategies. However, the 49ers enterprises, and obviously the organisation pretty much led by Greta Steinson. Now you may say, well, Kevin Thelwell is the sporting director at Rangers now. Yeah, I mean, Kevin Thelwell is the sporting director at Rangers, but Greta Steinson, I think we've all seen over the last few weeks, months, etc., has a huge part to play in that process. You know, I think it's really clear that Parag Marathe, that Jed York, that all those people behind the Enterprises team listen to Greta Steinson, that he is the guy they kind of go to on football matters because they're an NFL franchise. They're not a football franchise. Now, the way that they are looking to operate once they are promoted, once the promotion is in place and they're in the Premier League, and they're obviously working through the off season to develop a playing squad at Leeds United to remain within the Premier League, is very much following a data-driven sabermetrics analysis style working of players. So it's scouring of markets, looking at their data, looking at their analytics, looking at their XGs, looking at their fitness form, looking at their injury records, looking at their looking at all the key metrics. What is their duels won? What are their aerial duels won? What percentage of tackles do they win? What is their pass accuracy percentage? It's all that very much data driven analysis of players to take that forward. Now, that is a very American model. If you look at the NFL, if you look at the NHL, if you look at the MLB, you look at the NBA, all the franchises over there, and they are franchises at the end of the day, not exactly set teams. They don't follow the same sort of club strategies that we follow over here. It very much is a data-driven market. It is a situation where everything is looked at in terms of data. So what are their percentage success rates in these different element areas, so that they can therefore bring those players into the organisation, within the club squad. That has to be the strategy going forward. So this is very much, I think, how the Niners will operate once they take over Rangers, is that they will input this data-driven analysis of players, a data strategy, a sabermetrics. For those of you who haven't seen it, I don't know if any of you have seen the film Moneyball with Brad Pitt and the big guy, I can't remember his name now, where they obviously it's the story of Billy Beane, the GM of the Oakland A's, and he takes over the Oakland A's. They lose their 3-star players, and the way they replace them is by replacing them in the aggregate. So basically finding what the average they need for each player to match up to 3 players. So that the average for a certain player is an X number of hits, so they go and get 3 players that can match up to that one player. It's replacing them in the aggregates. Now, that is very much a data-driven Moneyball kind of philosophy, and it seems very much that will be the strategy that will be introduced at Rangers, a Moneyball strategy. And that obviously comes off the back of a trading model. It comes off the back of bringing in young players who you develop, who you improve, and then obviously in 2 to 3 years' time, you sell on for big profits. It very much is a bringing in a self-sustaining model, a model where it is not dependent on the owners putting their hands in their pockets and spending vast sums of their own money, because realistically that is not a viable strategy to use anymore. With FFP, with PSR, where you've got to spend 82% of your revenue, whether it's in PSR, I can't remember what the FFP rule is, but if you want to be compliant with those rules to compete in UEFA competitions, you've got to follow this strategy. You can't just expect your owner to go, well, there's £100 million, go and buy some players, because you're going to be in breach of PSR. You're going to be in breach of FFP because you will overspend. Your wages and your outlay will far outweigh your incomes, which is not allowed anymore under these PSR regulations. So, the way we've got to work this now is that the Rangers will go over to this trading model, full on with this trading model now. That Kevin Thelwell, that Greta Steinson, that Niels Koppen, if he's still at the club, will be expected to bring in young, dynamic players. Now, the reports that we're reading is very much that Steinson and Thelwell are scouring the markets across the world. This is not a case of just looking at domestic homegrown talent. That whilst domestic homegrown talent has a part to play, as we've seen from Kevin Thelwell and Greta Steinson's work at academies to bring through players through academies, and I think that will continue at Rangers, it still is an element of looking to different markets around the world to find good value players. So, like we did with Hamza Igaman, going to the Moroccan market, going to the Eastern European market, going to the Scandinavian market, going to the South American market, looking for these players that you can pick up for, you know, not a great deal of cash, and then in 2 to 3 years' time sell on for huge profits. That is the way that this strategy will be, I think, put into place. A data-driven strategy is not based on a money strategy. It is based on looking at the best value for money. It's looking at who will obviously, you know, develop well, what the upward trend is for these different players. That is the way I think this strategy is going to work. Now, like I said, I haven't heard, I don't know this for a fact. I'm basically going off what I've seen from the Niners to Leeds. Now, Leeds obviously last summer sold 3 of their best players, Crescencio Somerville, Jorginho Ruta and Archie Gray, for a substantial profit. And I think that is the way forward that they will look to go with Rangers, that, you know, given 12 to 18 months time, that players that were purchased, say, last summer will be sold on for big profits, that then in 12 to 18 months time from that, players bought this summer will be sold on for big profits, and it will obviously then start with a self-funding strategy, a self-funding model, helping the club to move forward. You know, this is the way forward. And look, I'd love... Of course, I would love to go back to the days of Walter, Graham Souness and Dick Advocat, when there was an open checkbook and we could buy the best players in the world. We could buy the Brian Laudrups, the Paul Gascoignes, the Lorenzo Amorusos, the Michael Moles, the Fernando Ricksons, the Peter Lovenkrantzes, the Terry Butchers, you know, the Gary Stevens, the Trevor Stevens, the Chris Woods, the Mark Hateleys of this world. I'd love to be able to go back to that, but that is never going to happen anymore. You know, as a club, we do not have the money or the ability under PSR and financial fair play to do that. The club does not generate enough revenue, enough income at this point in time to go and spend 15, 20 million pound on a player. And I think, you know, any fans that think that we're going to go and spend 40, 50, 60, 70 million this summer are living in cloud cuckoo land. You know, if you genuinely think that we're going to be starting to sign 10, 12, 15 million pound players now, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. It's never going to happen. You know, that is not the strategy the Niners will introduce. And if you look at how Leeds operate, if you look at how a number of clubs, not just Leeds, but Brentford, Brighton, Villa to some extent, you know, clubs like that, even in the Bournemouth, in the Premier League, who, you know, are not clubs that generate massive incomes, but do obviously generate any income they do through player transfers, through player trading. You know, look at Bournemouth, for example. They've got Huijsen, Kerkez, Semenyo. Now, there's a good chance that this summer they're going to generate somewhere in the region of over 150, 160 million pounds in transfer fees just for those 3 players, which is then money that comes back into the club, is reinvested into the academy, is reinvested into the playing squad. Now, I don't think for a minute they're going to go and spend, you know, say 50, 55 million pound on replacements for Kerkez, Huijsen and Semenyo. You know, that's not the way it's going to work. It will be 10 million here, 15 there, 20 million there. And I think, you know, the reason they can do that, and the reason we can't do that, obviously, is because the EPL is a lot heavily more funded than the SPL. But, you know, I think if we can start generating 20, 30 million pound for players, 50 million, you know, you're looking at a situation where we perhaps then could spend 10 million pound on a player. You could bring in 4 or 5 players for 10 million, similar to what them across the city are doing with the 11 million they wasted on Engels, the 9 million they wasted on Adam Ida. I mean, 20 million pound on what I would call lower championship grade footballers. So, you know, at the end of the day, you look at it and you say, this is the way forward. It is going to be a data-driven strategy. It will be a sabermetrics, Moneyball kind of strategy working forward, a transfer model-driven strategy going forward. Guys, I'd love to know your thoughts. Like I said, this is what I'm going off, what I've seen reported. You know, down here, you know, obviously around Leeds United, and obviously, like I said, they are the club that are owned by the 49ers. We can only look at that. Daniel Farke, who is the current manager, is likely to lose his job despite the fact he's got them promoted. Because at the end of the day, you know, they want success. They want a good manager. They want the best manager to take them forward. They want a manager who fits not only their model, but a manager who can do what they want to do. That in terms of moving the club forward, in terms of absolutely developing the club. And I think obviously this spells the end for Barry Ferguson, and that's why I think they're looking at the likes of Marco Rosa and Steven Gerrard as the next Rangers manager. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to on the video. And remember always, please never forget, we are the people.